When you go to see live music, what do you expect to see? Well, it obviously depends on what type of music it is. A piano recital will be very different to an electronic performer, which will be very different to a guitar-y rock band. But is backing acceptable in a live situation? Well, there have been many instances in the past where artists have been called out for using backing live, and especially for miming vocals. You wouldn't expect a piano recital to involve a person sat at a piano, moving their hands about as if they were playing while a CD played, unless, of course, it was an artsy statement about reality, perception, performance, etc. Is electronic music different in this respect? Electronic music has a long history of playing with pre-composed and pre-recorded sound. From the earliest recordings, to steam organs, to the Theatre of the Bauhaus, to Musique Concrète, to Milton Babbitt and the Radiophonic Workshop, to scratching, turntablism, acid house, techno, rap, drum machines, sequencers, controllers, we can safely say that the idea of having a pre-arranged composition obediently play at the push of a button is very well established in the realm of electronic music. Indeed, in certain areas of electronic music, such as systems music and modular, it's part of the raison d'etre of that music, to dispense with the traditional performance altogether and allow the machines to come to the fore. Are sequencers and drum machines more valid then than pre-recorded backing? I think it depends. The flexibility of interweaving sequences in a live performance and the use of controllers and hardware to shape the music in real time can be an important part of the experience of live electronic music. But that can often lead to performers being hunched over their kit, bashing away at a bank of buttons, or worse still a laptop, largely ignoring the audience because, frankly, their workload is too great. And whenever this question arises in my mind, I remember what Gary Newman once said in an interview.
A lot of the stuff in telecom would be like CR78 and
Yeah.
and all that really old drum machine stuff. Well, you're talking, 25, 30-year-old technology.
Yeah.
It's not just going to go boom, boom. What's
Yeah.
the point?
Yeah.
What's the point in trying to worry about
Yeah.
or worrying about whether it's going to work each
Yeah.
night? Much better to just stick it on that. You're not playing it.
Yeah.
What's the difference between pressing a go button for a drum machine or
Yeah.
pressing the play button on a DAW?
So do Boo use backing then? Well, yes, but there's a continuum of backing, with hitting play on the CD player at one end, and believe me, I've witnessed that before now, and triggering literally everything in real time at the other. Because we want to play parts on instruments, we've evolved to be somewhere in the middle, with a bit of triggering, a bit of hit play and leave it, and a bit of live playing. We basically play what we can with our four hands. Because we play songs live rather than improvised pieces, we want to have the backing sort of run on rails, but with a little bit of flexibility with certain parts of the songs, such as intros, endings, and various triggered one-shot sounds. We use pre-recorded sections and stems of drums, for example, because we couldn't bring all the various drum machines and pads out with us, and many of our drum sounds are made on synths that were also used for other parts. It's also simpler, lighter, less expensive to achieve, and more reliable than a whole bunch of kit up there on the stage with us. Because nothing's being triggered by MIDI or from a master clock, it gives it a nice bit of roughness, a sort of human feel, because we're the ones triggering it, and we really enjoy the aliveness that this method brings to a performance. Let me give you an example of how this works. This is Under the River, and we never played this song before, so we're going to do it from scratch. Choice of kit. Well, this goes hand in hand with deciding on which songs we plan to play. And as the set list grows, so does the setup. But we usually start with one or two songs and build from there. As we get into practicing, it becomes obvious what's working and where everything needs to go. And from there, it's a case of practicing like crazy and building up muscle memory. We're building a new live rig at the moment. The old one was getting a bit tired. And we've started with new stands. These ones are from Gravity, with a rapid desk and a tier. We needed to drill holes in the desk so the tier would fit. So, Gravity, if you're watching, it would be nice if it was possible to use these together without the need for drilling steel. So far, we're using the Bass Station 2, the OP6, and the Microfreak. Bridget will probably be wearing the CS01, and there's going to be another couple of synths on her side. As yet, we haven't decided what they'll be. We use this MIDI Man multi-mixer because it's small and it gives us extra inputs, which go into the Yamaha mixer, which sends a stereo mix to front of house. We use two Zoom MS70 CDR pedals, one on the send from the mixer and one to beef up the bass station. These pedals allow you to chain up to 6 effects, and they're amazing value and sound pretty good. Bridget has a chain of pedals on the CS01, and these will vary according to what we're playing, but she'll usually start with a delay into an overdrive. On vocals, Bridget uses the Voice Live Play, with wet and dry signals on separate outputs so the front of house sound person can balance those to the room. And finally, we use two Akai MPX8s for stems and triggering of samples. They're cheap, light, and mostly reliable so far. Creating the stems. So, here is Under the River. Now, it was created on Making Waves, but that computer is now dying, so I've exported the stems to Reaper. First, I'll remove anything we'll be performing. The bass part, the melody, and the arpeggio for the chorus are what I initially planned to play. Obviously, the vocals need to be removed, but there's a harmony at one point with some effects that we can't replicate, so I'll leave that little bit in for now. Now I want to see if there's anything I can remove that isn't really needed. It's always a good idea to make space for anything that might end up being improvised and added in rehearsal. Now I do a little EQ, compression, and limiting. I want this to sound as good and chunky as I can before I render it out. Next, we need to recreate the sounds for the parts we removed on the instruments. So now the bass station's going to be the Minimoog, the Op6 is going to be the Dominion, and the Microfreak will be the SH1, Moog, and ProMars arpeggio. Now we need to create the samples for the Akai MPX8. Now, the MPX8 will only allow us to have a maximum of 30 meg of samples across its 8 pads, so we have to be a bit creative on how we make these samples if we want them to fit. It's trial and error, but we usually get there in the end. Now, in the past, I've been known to chop songs into sections and loop them, and I've even made loops of individual track sections to trigger by hand, so I can jump from one part of the song to the next by bashing the pads. But this meant I was more focused on the Akai pads than on the synths and the crowd, so I've gradually adopted a different approach over the years. I've had to think about how I want to do this, and firstly, I want a stereo one-shot sample for the beginning of the song. To do this, I create a region for the sound in Reaper, and then I render it as a 16-bit 32K stereo WAV. The maximum the Akai can handle is 44.1K at 16-bit, but as I want to make several stereo one-shots for this song, I'm being cautious with the sample rate because I don't want to make the project too big to load into the MPX8. This sound was made on the Fusebox and the ProMars, and I want to have it in stereo. So, once again, I do a stereo 32K sample for the shorter one and another for the longer one. Now I want to grab a short section from the start of the song to loop as an intro. This will allow some flexibility for how and when the main song starts. And once again, it's a stereo 32K WAV. And finally, I select a region from when the drums start to the end of the song, but this time I render it at 44.1 in mono. This improves the quality of the sample, and as it's mostly drums and the backbone of the song, it usually sounds more powerful in mono anyway. Mono rules. And how do we get all that into the Akai? Well, I put all the WAV files into the root of an SD card and insert it into the MPX8. I then load the samples in, largest first, and then place them on the pads that make sense to me. The Akai can play samples as a one-shot, a hold, which only plays for as long as your finger is on the pad, and a loop. I select which is needed. Once it's all inside the sample player, all we need to do now is practice. If during practice we decide we want to add anything or take anything away, we can just change it all and start again. And that's basically how we usually play music live.